A ragged scream tore through the night, ripping the silence like glass shattering in a tomb. It carried terror, so raw, it made skin crawl and blood run cold, echoing across the abandoned farmland. Within the skeletal farmhouse walls, something dragged, heavy and wet, scraping the warped floorboards with rhythmic cruelty. The air thickened, reeking of rust and decay, clinging to the throat with every shallow breath. Sarah gripped her chest, whispering, "Who's there?" But only the wind replied, carrying the scent of iron. A door creaked, groaning with years of neglect, as shadows lengthened unnaturally. From the shattered doorway came a whisper, hoarse, deliberate and intimate, her name. Sarah staggered back, her mind refusing what her ears accepted. No one should know her name here, yet the darkness itself seemed to breathe it. And beneath the whisper, faint but certain, came the soft wail of her child, though he lay sleeping in the next room. Sarah whispered, "Ethan," but the sound died in her throat, her voice thin and strangled. The farmhouse seemed to breathe, boards groaning like ribs flexing under unseen weight. She turned toward the bedroom door where the faint cry echoed. Her pulse thundered in her ears, each beat sharp as a hammer. A chill swept down her spine, her legs weak as if the air itself drained her strength. Her child's name came again, but softer, carried on the walls like it seeped from the plaster. "Mama," the voice whimpered, though she knew Ethan was asleep. She staggered forward, gripping the rail, her heart torn between dread and maternal instinct. The hallway grew longer, stretching like a nightmare corridor, while shadows swallowed the corners. The cry rose once more, broken, desperate, yet hollow. Sarah reached the doorknob, frozen, certain that opening it would change everything forever. The door swung open with a groan, and Sarah's breath caught. Ethan lay in his bed, tiny chest rising and falling, his face calm in dream. The cry had stopped, replaced by the gentle hum of sleep. Sarah staggered closer, whispering, "Ethan?" Her son shifted, clutching his toy bear, unaware of her trembling form. She leaned down, brushing strands of hair from his forehead, the warmth of his skin proof he was real. Yet the silence pressed against her ears, thick, oppressive, unnatural. It was not the silence of peace, but of something waiting. Her eyes drifted to the corner where the shadows seemed too deep, as though something crouched just beyond reach. Sarah forced a laugh, brittle and hollow, telling herself it was only exhaustion. But, as she turned to leave, she swore she heard a faint sigh, not from Ethan, but from the dark. Sarah backed into the hallway, her steps careful, her ears straining. The house moaned again, floorboards creaking like whispers. A faint knock echoed from the far end, steady and deliberate. She whispered, "Who's there?" but the air swallowed her words. The shadows rippled, the wallpaper peeling like skin curling from heat. Sarah's chest tightened as the knock turned into scratching, nails dragging against wood. She wanted to run, but her legs obeyed the pull of dread, drawing her toward the sound. Every step felt heavier, the hallway stretching longer than it should. Her heart pounded until it hurt, but curiosity outweighed fear, pushing her closer. When she reached the end, she found the old storage door trembling, the scratches coming from the inside. She froze, terror rooting her in place, as something clawed desperately to get out. Sarah stumbled back as the scratching stopped, replaced by silence heavy enough to crush her chest. Then a voice whispered from behind, calm yet sharp as broken glass. "It's not your child." She spun around, but no one was there. Her skin crawled, the air thick with breath that was not her own. She whispered, "Show yourself," her words quivering in defiance. From the window at the far end, lightning flashed, illuminating a figure in the yard. A man, thin, ragged coat hanging loose, stood with eyes fixed on her. His lips moved, though no sound reached her ears. The storm rolled overhead, thunder shaking the glass. When the light faded, the man was gone, leaving only the wet sound of the wind dragging across the walls. Sarah pressed her back to the door, whispering, "God help me," as the cry began again, closer this time. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling as she wrapped them around a chipped mug of cold coffee. Dawn pressed faint gray light through the broken window, but it brought no comfort. She whispered, it wasn't real, trying to convince herself the cries had been dreams. The farmhouse seemed too quiet now, as if it was listening to her lie. She turned toward the stairs, hearing the faint shift of wood above, though Ethan slept soundly. Her chest tightened, every sound amplified, every silence weighted. She closed her eyes, fighting the exhaustion dragging at her mind. Yet beneath her breath came the whisper of truth. It had begun, and denial could not save them. Later that morning, Sarah stood outside with Detective Harris, her words rushed, desperate. You don't understand, she insisted. Harris scribbled notes with disinterest, his expression heavy with doubt. Creaking walls, strange dreams. That's all, he said flatly. Sarah's hands clenched, fury burning through her fear. Something is here, she whispered, her voice breaking. Harris glanced at the farmhouse, unimpressed, rain dripping from his hat brim. Old houses make noises, he muttered. Sarah turned away, her body trembling, realizing her pleas meant nothing. Alone again, she felt the farmhouse staring at her, mocking her need for help. Back inside, the lights flickered as Sarah moved through the hall. Her hand brushed the wall, feeling vibrations as though something crawled beneath the plaster. A toy rolled across the floor, stopping at her feet. She whispered Ethan's name, but he was upstairs. Her pulse quickened as another object slid from the shelf, falling without reason. She whispered, no, backing away. But the lights dimmed again. The air thickened with static, her hair rising against invisible charge. She reached for the switch, but the bulb burst, showering sparks. Darkness swallowed her, leaving only her breath and the shifting creak of something moving just beyond reach. That evening, a knock rattled the door. Sarah opened it to find a man cloaked in shadow, rain dripping from his coat. His eyes lingered too long, his voice low. You've heard it, haven't you? She stiffened, asking, who are you? He smiled faintly, a smile that held no warmth. Someone who knows what this house feeds on, he whispered. Sarah's chest tightened, fear mingling with desperate curiosity. She asked again, what do you mean? But he only shook his head. His words slithered into her thoughts. It won't stop. Not until it takes what it wants. Before she could demand answers, he turned, vanishing into the storm. Sarah walked the upstairs hallway, her steps slow, her heart heavy. She stopped near Ethan's door, her eyes drawn to faint scratches along the wall. She ran her fingertips across them, realizing they were fresh. She whispered, no one was here. But the truth clawed into her. The marks trailed downward toward the floorboards, curling like twisted letters. A shiver racked her spine as she crouched closer. The house creaked, the sound of weight shifting above her, though the attic was empty. Ethan stirred inside, murmuring in his sleep. Sarah pressed her hand against the wall, whispering, you won't touch him. But the scratches deepened before her eyes, carved by nothing she could see. The night pressed heavy against the farmhouse as Sarah peeked through the cracked curtains. Outside, beneath the crooked fence, a shadow lingered. Her breath caught as the outline sharpened into a figure watching the house. She whispered, please, not again, her voice trembling. The figure didn't move, yet its presence seeped into her bones, a pressure that made her skin burn. The wind stirred, and the shape wavered like smoke, then reformed. Her mind screamed to wake Ethan, to flee, yet her body betrayed her, rooted in dread. The farmhouse groaned as though it knew she wasn't alone. When Sarah blinked, the figure vanished, but the imprint of its gaze clung like frost on her skin. The silence outside was worse than the presence, for it promised return. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, realizing she had been marked. Sarah jolted awake to the sound of small footsteps across the hallway. Heart pounding, she rushed to Ethan's room, only to find him standing in the center, his eyes half closed, lips moving. He muttered words she didn't recognize, syllables harsh and guttural, straining against his child's voice. Ethan, wake up, she whispered, shaking him gently. He swayed, clutching his teddy bear, repeating the strange chant. The room seemed to warp around him, the air rippling as if heated. Sarah's breath stilled as his eyes opened briefly, clouded with pale gray unseeing. She recoiled, whispering, "This isn't you," but Ethan only shivered, dropping his toy. The chanting ceased, leaving only the sound of her own ragged breathing. Ethan collapsed into her arms, asleep once more, his face calm, as though nothing had happened. A scream split the silence from outside, raw and jagged. Sarah rushed to the window, seeing the neighbor, Mr. Collins, stumbling in the yard. His arms flailed as if unseen hands dragged him into the mud. She screamed his name, David, but he couldn't hear. His mouth opened wide, but the sound was swallowed by the night. A shadow coiled around him like smoke, pulling him toward the barn. His body thrashed, fingers clawing the earth, leaving deep trenches in the soil. Sarah's stomach turned as his face contorted, eyes bulging with terror. Then the shadow yanked, snapping his body into silence. The barn doors slammed shut without a hand touching it. Sarah gasped, gripping the windowsill until her knuckles whitened. She knew she had witnessed more than death. Something feeding. Later that night, Sarah sat shivering on the couch, arms wrapped around herself. A knock rattled the door, sharp and urgent. She opened it to find a woman, eyes hollow, face pale, lips trembling. "You have to leave," the woman whispered, her voice cracked from years of silence. Sarah asked, "Who are you?" The woman's hands shook as she replied, "Someone who survived." She glanced toward the child's room with a look of pity. Sarah's stomach knotted, dread churning into anger. "Tell me what you know," she demanded, but the woman only shook her head. "It doesn't stop. It never stops." With that, the stranger turned, vanishing into the night fog. Sarah stood in the doorway, the cold air biting her skin, realizing the horror had a history long before her. Sarah replayed the events in her mind, desperation clawing at her. She turned to her phone, trembling hands scrolling through recordings. One file caught her eye, audio from Ethan's baby monitor tour. She pressed play, and her stomach clenched. The sound of crying filled the room, broken sobs echoing through the static. But Ethan was asleep in her lap. Her heart raced as the cries grew louder, layered, more than one voice, twisting into grotesque harmony. Then came the whisper, her own name, spoken in a rasp too close to the mic. Sarah's skin prickled, her breath ragged. She slammed the phone down, but the sound didn't stop. It bled from the walls themselves, vibrating through the floorboards. Sarah clutched Ethan tighter, whispering, "I won't let you take him," but the house laughed in silence. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands clenched, the faint sound of Ethan's breathing drifting from upstairs. The storm outside rattled the windows, but her focus stayed fixed on the man across from her. Michael, her old friend, had shown up without warning, his smile too calm for the chaos. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she demanded. His eyes flicked away, avoiding hers. The silence between them felt heavier than the thunder. She leaned forward, voice breaking, "You knew this house was wrong." Michael exhaled, his lips parting as if to confess, but instead he muttered, "You're exhausted. You're imagining things." The words were too polished, too rehearsed. Sarah's chest tightened with suspicion, a sick realization that betrayal was not just possible. It was already here. Michael's hands tapped nervously against the table, the rhythm betraying his denial. Sarah's voice rose, trembling with fury. "Don't lie to me. You knew what lived here." His face hardened, jaw clenched. "You're losing yourself, Sarah," he replied, though his tone cracked at the edges. She leaned back, cold fear bleeding into anger. Every word from him was another splinter in her chest, cutting deeper. The storm thundered, shaking the house, and for a moment the lights flickered. Sarah whispered, "If you're hiding something, you'll answer for it." His silence was answer enough. The space between them widened, not just across the table, but in trust that was now broken beyond repair. The front door banged open with the wind, and Detective Harris stepped in, his coat soaked with rain. He scanned the room, his skeptical eyes narrowing on Sarah's panic. Another story about shadows, he muttered. Sarah snapped. This isn't a story, it's happening. The detective dropped a damp folder on the table, its papers spilling out. Grainy photos of claw marks and missing persons filled the surface. Coincidences, he said flatly, though his jaw twitched. Sarah pointed at the photos, her voice sharp. Coincidences don't drag men into barn. Michael looked away, his silence deafening. The storm howled as Harris rubbed his temples, disbelief warring with fear he couldn't suppress forever. Sarah's thoughts spiraled, fragments of fear knotting into chaos. Every sound in the house throbbed louder, every shadow stretched longer. Her chest heaved as her vision swam. She whispered Ethan's name, but her own voice seemed distant, muffled by the house itself. Michael and Harris argued, their words warping into indistinct noise. She pressed her palms against her head, the wallpaper shifting like skin crawling. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it was burrowing into her mind. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she screamed, "Stop!" The sound rang hollow, as though swallowed before it left her lips. Silence fell, but it was not peace. It was the silence of something watching. Later that night, Sarah searched the kitchen, only to find Michael gone. His chair sat empty, the storm echoing through cracked glass. On the table lay a piece of paper marked with strange symbols, drawn in black ash. She traced them with shaking fingers, recognizing them from nightmares she could never remember fully. The paper stank of smoke, as though pulled from fire. She whispered, he knew, the words heavy as stone. Harris leaned closer, his skepticism cracking as he muttered, "What the hell is this?" Sarah's heart dropped as she realized Michael hadn't left in fear. He had left in allegiance. And the symbols weren't warnings. They were invitations. Sarah rummaged through the dusty cupboards of the farmhouse, her hands blackened with soot. A bundle of yellowed newspapers fell across the floor, scattering headlines that made her blood run cold. Each story carried a tragedy: missing children, unexplained deaths, neighbors speaking of cries in the night. She whispered, "It's always been here." Her fingers shook as she lifted one clipping, showing a woman clutching a lifeless child, dated decades ago. The farmhouse was not cursed by chance. It was a vessel that fed on grief. Her heart hammered as Ethan's cry drifted faintly from upstairs, not loud, not desperate, but eerily familiar to the cries on the page. She realized the sound was older than her child, older than her. Michael returned, his face hollow, his eyes refusing to meet Sarah's. She gripped the newspaper in her hand like a weapon, shouting, "You knew all of this." He flinched, then sighed, his words heavy. "I tried to warn you, but it needs you. It needs him." Sarah's chest constricted as Ethan's faint laughter echoed from upstairs, unnatural and brittle. She stepped closer, fury and terror mingling. "You betrayed us," she whispered. Michael's silence was confirmation. He had not been a protector, he had been a keeper, guiding her into the house like prey into a trap. The air thickened, pressing against her throat, while the storm outside roared like approval. The floorboards rattled as the air turned sharp, thick with the stench of iron. Sarah froze as the walls quivered, and from the dark corner it emerged. The entity seeped out like smoke, solidifying into form, its face shifting. Sometimes a child's, sometimes a corpse, sometimes nothing at all. Sarah's blood iced as its hollow voice coiled around her ears, imitating Ethan's cry perfectly. She whispered, "No," clutching her chest as the sound grew louder, layered with voices of the dead. The entity smiled with a mouth that was not a mouth, bending the light around it. Sarah stumbled back, realizing the crying had never been Ethan's. It had always been the thing's call. Upstairs, Ethan's voice whispered words no 6-year-old should know, deep and ancient. Sarah climbed the stairs, each step heavy as stone. She pushed the door open to find him sitting upright in bed, his eyes pale gray, unblinking. His lips moved with phrases she couldn't understand. His tone too low, too old. She gasped, "Ethan, stop!" But the house seemed to answer instead, the walls pulsing with his rhythm. His small fingers traced symbols into the sheets, the same black marks Michael had left behind. Sarah's knees buckled, tears spilling as she whispered, "They've taken you." Ethan turned his head toward her, but the smile on his face wasn't his own. Sarah fell to her knees, the truth sinking into her bones. Ethan wasn't just touched by the entity, he was its doorway. Every cry, every whisper, every shadow had been leading her here. The farmhouse had chosen him as the vessel. She whispered, "You won't take him," though her words quivered. Ethan tilted his head, his small voice layered with another deeper tone, whispering, "It's already done." The room pulsed, air vibrating, floorboards trembling under her. Michael stood in the hall, silent, his face carved with guilt, but no remorse. Sarah realized she was no longer fighting for safety. She was fighting for Ethan's soul. And the house was winning. The farmhouse shook as if alive, its walls vibrating with guttural cries. Glass shattered from the windows, spraying shards across the floor. Sarah clutched Ethan in her arms, whispering, "Hold on, baby," though his body stiffened with unnatural strength. The ceiling lights flickered, casting violent shadows that danced like predators. Blood seeped from the walls, dripping in slow rivulets, pooling across the warped boards. The sound of dragging chains echoed from the barn outside, rattling closer. Sarah screamed for Michael, but he was gone, his betrayal carved into silence. The storm howled, thunder roaring like a beast circling the house. Sarah realized this was no haunting. It was a claiming, and the farmhouse was the altar. Sarah dragged Ethan toward the stairs, but his body twisted, small hands gripping her shoulders with unnatural force. His voice layered with the entity's rasp, whispering, "Stay." Her stomach turned as she looked into his pale gray eyes, glowing faintly in the dark. The floor groaned, splitting beneath her feet, cracks spreading like veins. She staggered, nearly dropping him as the air grew thick, pressing her chest. She shouted, "You're not him!" But the child's face smiled with an expression that wasn't his. The walls shrieked, their wooden frames bending inward, as if the house itself was closing around her. Sarah pressed forward, driven by desperate love, even as the house tried to swallow her whole. Detective Harris burst into the hallway, pistol raised, his voice cracking. "Get away from him!" Sarah screamed, "Don't shoot!" But Harris aimed at the shifting shadow behind Ethan. The entity lunged forward, its smoke-like form slamming into Harris, hurling him against the wall. His body hit with a sickening crack, blood streaking the peeling wallpaper. Sarah gasped, horror tearing her chest as Harris tried to rise, coughing blood, his eyes wide with disbelief. The pistol clattered to the floor, useless against something that wasn't flesh. He whispered, "It's real," before collapsing. Sarah's legs trembled, fury surging as she realized no one else could fight for Ethan. It was her, and only her, against the thing. Sarah stood trembling in the parlor as the entity coiled around the walls, its form stretching with impossible angles. Ethan's body levitated from her arms, suspended midair, his face blank. She screamed, clawing at the smoky tendrils, but they burned her skin like ice. The entity whispered with Ethan's voice, "He's mine," its words rattling through the floorboards. Sarah's tears streaked down her face as she shouted, "Take me instead!" The house pulsed, a heartbeat echoing through the wood, as if considering her offer. For a moment, Ethan's eyes flickered, his small lips forming her name. Sarah's knees buckled as she realized the choice had become real: sacrifice herself or lose Ethan forever. The storm climaxed as Sarah stepped forward, her voice breaking, "Take me!" Her body shook violently, but her eyes locked onto Ethan, who trembled above the ground. The entity roared, a sound like thousands of screams layered together, shaking the farmhouse to its foundation. Sarah reached her arms wide, surrendering herself. The tendrils coiled around her, dragging her upward as Ethan fell back into his bed, unconscious. Sarah's body twisted in agony as the house consumed her, but her eyes remained on Ethan until the end. The last sound she heard was his small, steady breath returning, pure and human. Then came silence, broken only by the storm outside. The sacrifice was made, but the price was carved into the walls forever. The storm subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving the farmhouse wrapped in unnatural stillness. Ethan lay motionless on the bed, his breathing faint but steady. Sarah was gone, her presence ripped from the world, her sacrifice echoing in the silence. The house smelled of smoke and blood, the walls still trembling faintly like a body settling after death. Ethan stirred, his lips whispering, "Mama," though no one answered. His small hands clutched the sheets, unaware of the horror that had unfolded. The farmhouse groaned, satisfied, its hunger fed. Yet in the silence, the absence of Sarah was louder than any scream. Ethan awoke, his eyes fluttering open, their natural blue returned. He sat up slowly, confusion flickering across his face. The house was quiet, too quiet, but he no longer felt the weight of the entity pressing on him. He whispered, "Mama," and looked around, but no reply came. Instead, the farmhouse groaned softly, as though breathing with him. He stepped onto the cold floor, his small feet leaving imprints in the dust. Though his voice was his own again, the silence carried an aftertaste of her sacrifice, heavy and unyielding. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew she had saved him, but at a cost that could never be undone. The front door creaked open as the survivor returned, her hollow eyes searching the house. She found Ethan standing in the hall, clutching his teddy bear. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "She gave herself." Ethan's head lowered, his silence an answer. The woman's expression darkened, sorrow mingling with grim recognition. "It will begin again," she said, her voice breaking. The farmhouse fed on sacrifice, and the cycle was unbroken. Ethan clutched the bear tighter, staring at the walls as though he could hear their whispers. The survivor's hands shook as she backed away, knowing she was too late to change fate. The farmhouse fell silent once more, its windows cracked and blackened. Dust swirled in the morning light, settling like ash after a fire. Outside, the yard stood empty, the barn door closed tight as though nothing had happened. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly, carrying the memory of Sarah's final scream. Ethan sat alone in the living room, rocking slowly with his teddy bear, whispering words only the house could hear. The air grew still, the silence heavier than any storm. The farmhouse had fed, but hunger was eternal, waiting for the next family to arrive. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the farmhouse windows, a sound broke the silence. A child's cry, soft, trembling, unmistakable, echoed through the halls. Ethan stirred, lifting his head, confusion tightening his small face. He was awake, yet the cry continued, moving from room to room, as if another child still lingered within the walls. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Mama," but no answer came. The cry grew louder, layered and broken, until it was everywhere at once. The farmhouse shuddered with satisfaction, its hunger not gone but only paused. The cycle had not ended. It had only begun again.